The young man knocked on the dressing room door 3 times before anyone answered. He was 19 years old, and he had been standing in that corridor for 2 hours. James Brown opened the door, looked at him for a long moment, said 4 words. The young man walked away. He did not come back for 10 years. The year was 1962. James Brown was 29 years old and already a force the music industry had not fully figured out how to contain. He was not yet the godfather of soul in name. That title would come later. But he was already the thing the title described. He moved on a stage the way weather moves. He sweated through suits and replaced them mid-show. He dropped to his knees and was helped back up and dropped again. He played to audiences who had never seen anything like him and came away feeling they had survived something extraordinary. He was also, in 1962, a man actively building something specific. He had Sid Nathan and King Records to fight with, and he fought with them constantly, over production, over promotion, over the fundamental question of who controlled what he made. He had Bobby Bird, who had believed in him before anyone else. He had a band that could do things together that individual musicians should not have been able to do. He did not have time for every young musician who waited in a backstage corridor hoping for 5 minutes. Noah was 19 years old. He was from Augusta, Georgia, the same city where James Brown had come from. He had been playing guitar since he was 11 years old. He had been writing songs since he was 15. He had never recorded anything professionally. He had a notebook full of music that he had never played for anyone who could tell him whether it was worth anything. He had been watching James Brown from a distance for 4 years, not only as a fan, though he was a fan, but as a student. He had seen in Brown the proof that music made in a specific place by a specific kind of person could reach anywhere, could reach everyone. That the distance between Augusta and the rest of the world was not fixed, that it was a problem that could be solved by the right person with the right sound. He saved money for 2 months to afford the bus to Macon. He stood in line for 3 hours for a ticket to the show. He sat in the 3rd row and watched every movement Brown made with the concentration of someone taking careful notes. He watched the way Brown communicated with his band without speaking, the way he read the room and adjusted, the way he made 2,500 people feel like he was performing specifically for each one of them. After the show, he found his way backstage. He talked his way past 2 different people by saying he had a delivery. He waited in the corridor outside the dressing room for 2 hours while the noise of the post-show settled into the particular quiet that comes after something large has ended. He knocked 3 times. James Brown opened the door in a fresh shirt, a towel around his neck, a glass of water in his hand. He looked at the young man in front of him and said nothing for a moment. Noah said he had come from Augusta, said he had been writing songs, said he believed he had something Brown should hear, said he would play it right here in the corridor if Brown would give him 5 minutes. Brown looked at him. He said, "Come back with something." Then he closed the door. Noah stood in the corridor for a moment. He looked at the closed door. Then he turned around and walked back through the arena and out into the night and took the bus back to Augusta. He was not defeated. That surprised him. He thought about it on the bus ride home and decided that the 4 words were not a rejection. They were instructions. An instruction requires a response. He intended to respond. He spent the next 10 years following them. He worked a day job at a hardware store for 3 years, playing on weekends and on Tuesday nights at a venue in Augusta that paid $15 per set. He saved enough to buy a second-hand Stratocaster over the course of 8 months, paying for it in installments. He played that guitar until the frets wore down, and then had them replaced and played it some more. He kept writing. The notebook from 1962 was full by 1964. He had started a second one by 1966, a third by 1969. Not all of it was good, he knew that. He was developing the ability to hear the difference between what was good and what was almost good. And that ability, the ability to hear clearly what you yourself have made, took longer to develop than any technical skill. He played small venues across Georgia and South Carolina. The kind of rooms where you make enough money to stay in the business if you are careful, and where you develop something more important than money, which is the ability to understand what an audience is feeling before they know they are feeling it. He had been working on that ability for years. By 1970, he was beginning to trust it. He had also come, over those 10 years, to understand something about James Brown that he had not understood at 19. He had known then that Brown was extraordinary. What he had come to understand in the decades since was why. Not just the talent, not just the physicality, but the discipline. The ferocious, unglamorous discipline of a man who held himself to a standard and expected everyone around him to reach it. Brown rehearsed his band until they could read a room the way he could. He had a standard that was not negotiable. It was the same standard Noah had been trying to reach in rooms across the South for 10 years. In the spring of 1972, Noah drove to Nashville with a reel-to-reel recording of a song he had been working on for 3 months. He had finally gotten it to a place he believed was finished. Not polished, not produced, but structurally sound in the way a piece of furniture is sound when every joint holds, regardless of whether it has been painted. He left the tape with a man named Marcus, who worked in music licensing and publishing, and knew everyone in the industry who mattered, and several who did not. He asked Marcus to listen to it and tell him who should hear it. He left his phone number and drove back to Augusta. 2 weeks later, Marcus called. He said, "Someone wants to meet you." Noah drove back to Nashville. Marcus brought him to a rehearsal space in a building near the edge of downtown. He opened the door. James Brown was sitting in a folding metal chair in the corner of the room, a sandwich in one hand, reading something. He did not look up immediately. Marcus said, "This is the man who wrote the song." Brown looked up. He looked at Noah for a long moment. Noah had been in this position before. He had stood in front of James Brown and waited for him to decide something. He was 30 years old now instead of 19. He had 10 years of small venues and 3 notebooks and 1 tape behind him. He stood in the same posture he had stood in that backstage corridor in 1962, straight, not apologetic, not performing confidence, but not lacking it either. Brown said, "You wrote that?" Noah said yes. Brown said, "How long did it take you?" Noah said, 10 years. Brown put down the sandwich. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but recognition, the look of a man who understands something without needing it explained. He said, "Sit down." They talked for 2 hours. Brown wanted to understand the construction of the song, where the rhythm had come from, why the arrangement went where it went, what Noah had heard in his head when he wrote the opening phrase. Noah answered each question directly. He had been waiting to have this conversation for a long time. At one point, Brown asked where he was from. Noah said Augusta. Brown was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know something about Augusta." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Noah understood. He had understood it since he was 15 years old, watching James Brown move across a stage and thinking, "That man came from the same place I came from, and look what he did with it." The song was used. There were production decisions to navigate, arrangements to work out. It was not the defining moment of Brown's 1972 tour, but it was there. It was in the catalog. It was part of what Brown left behind. Noah received his credit. He received his royalties. He continued writing. He eventually recorded 2 albums of his own, small releases, regional distribution, the kind of records that mean a great deal to the people who find them. He played until he was in his 60s. He taught guitar after that. He and Brown encountered each other twice more in the following years. Each time, Brown remembered him, not with sentiment. Brown was not organized around sentiment, but with the specific acknowledgement that passes between people who understand what the other one has done. Noah had done the work. Brown had told him to come back with something. He had taken 10 years and come back with something real. Late in his life, a young journalist came to interview Noah about his career. Near the end of the conversation, she asked him, what was the best advice he had ever received? Noah thought about it for a while. Then he said, "A man once told me to come back with something." He did not explain what he meant by that. He did not have to. If you need it explained, you are not ready to hear it. The journalist asked who the man was. Noah smiled. He said, "Someone who knew what he was talking about." Subscribe to Untold Soul Legends. Every week, we go behind the music, into the moments the history books almost missed. Hit the bell so you never miss a story, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. These stories deserve to be heard.